Without the Passover, the appointed way of worship, is there any other means by which we could receive the promise of forgiveness? Absolutely not. This is why Jesus himself came to this earth in the flesh to establish the holy ordinance of worship, the Passover of the New Covenant. We refer to it using expressions such as decrees, statutes, and laws. So, what did Jesus say about keeping the Passover? Let us keep reflecting on Luke chapter 22 because it contains an important message. Luke chapter 22, verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." Jesus sent his chief disciples, Peter and John, to make preparations for the Passover. Why was that? It was because he is Melchizedek and he is God. Since it is prophesied that Jesus is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, the sacrifice is not made with the blood of sheep or goats. Then, with what must it be made? Just as Melchizedek brought out bread and wine, he brought out bread and wine and granted the festival of eternal life to all mankind. However, if we do not participate in this worship of eternal life that God has bestowed upon us, we can never receive eternal life and the forgiveness of sins. This is why Jesus said, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover." If it were a meaningless act, simply eating a piece of bread and drinking a cup of wine, there would be no reason for him to desire it so eagerly. God came to this earth to grant us salvation, striving so earnestly for mankind, despite facing all kinds of ridicule, contempt, and abuse. If this were unrelated to our salvation, why would he have done it? Isn't that true? The Passover certainly has an appointed time. In Leviticus chapter 23, verse 4, the date is clearly specified. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. Let us continue in verse 14. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table. And he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Why did he so eagerly desire to eat the Passover? It is because Jesus is Melchizedek. He had to teach mankind and set the example of how to conduct worship with bread and wine. God had no need to be baptized. Isn't this true? However, God received baptism that is meant for sinners. Why did he do that? It was because he set an example for us. All these regulations and laws are not for God's own sake. God established them, commanded us to keep them, and instructed us on how to keep them. God is the lawgiver. He established this path for us so that we could receive the forgiveness of sins and enter the kingdom of heaven. It was not for his own sake that he established the Passover and the Sabbath day. Don't you agree? Then, just as Melchizedek brought out bread and wine as an offering, let us now examine the scene where Jesus Christ, who is the reality of Melchizedek, grants the blessings of eternal life and the forgiveness of sins to mankind through the bread and wine of the Passover. Let us turn to verse 19. And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is, what is this? My body given for you. It is not just a mere piece of bread." He confirmed the meaning of this bread, saying, "My body. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, he took the cup with the Passover wine and said, "This cup is, what is this cup? The new covenant in my blood, which is poured out. For whom did he pour it out? For you." He came to this earth as Melchizedek and awakened us to the system of truth. that is, God's regulations and laws which grant forgiveness of sins and eternal life through bread and wine. Then, we should become the people of God who live according to these laws and regulations, shouldn't we? When Jesus proclaimed this truth, he said, "This is the new covenant." In other words, it is a new promise. If the Passover, the law of Melchizedek, did not exist, mankind today would be unable to hope for the forgiveness of sins, eternal life, the kingdom of heaven, or salvation. Therefore, the Passover we observe is the Passover in which eternal life is both promised and guaranteed.